You're standing in East Africa. It's 1.5 million years ago. The sun is absolutely brutal, and you are covered head to toe in thick body hair. And here's the first thing that should break your brain a little. Underneath all that fur, your skin is pale, pinkish, almost white, because that's what our earliest ancestors were, furry and pale underneath, exactly like a chimpanzee is today. If you shave a chimp, you don't find dark skin, you find pale skin. So the story of human skin color does not start where you think it starts. It doesn't go from dark to light. It goes from pale to dark, and then, unbelievably recently, back to pale again in some places. And that last part, the part where some humans became light-skinned, may have happened so recently that it overlaps with people already building villages, farming wheat, and burying their dead in monuments. We are talking a few thousand years, not a few million. This is the story of why human skin changed color, and it is one of the strangest, most misunderstood chapters in the entire human story. And by the end of it, I promise you will never look at skin the same way again. Let's start with the fur, because everything begins there. Our ancestors were hairy apes living in the forests and woodlands of Africa, and like other apes, they had pale skin hiding under all that hair. The fur was the sunscreen. The skin underneath never needed pigment because it barely saw daylight. Then something changed. Our ancestors moved out of the shady forest and onto the open savanna, into direct, relentless, hammering sunshine. And they started doing something no other primate does. They started walking and running enormous distances in the heat of the day. And this created a serious engineering problem. Brains and bodies overheat. If you're going to run for hours under an African sun, you need a cooling system. So evolution gave us one of the best cooling systems in the animal kingdom: sweat. Humans are, pound for pound, some of the sweatiest animals on the planet. We are covered in millions of sweat glands, and we can shed heat by evaporating water off our skin with astonishing efficiency. It's the reason a human can, over a long enough distance, literally run an antelope to death. But there's a catch. Sweating doesn't work well through a thick coat of fur. Wet fur just traps heat and turns you into a soggy oven. So to make the sweating system work, the fur had to go. And over time, it did. We became the naked ape. And the moment that happened, we had a brand new catastrophic problem: pale skin, directly exposed to the most intense sunlight on Earth. All day, every day. This was not a minor inconvenience. This was a slow-motion emergency. Now, most people assume the problem with sun is skin cancer, and sure, that's a problem. But skin cancer usually kills you later in life, often after you've already had children, which means evolution doesn't care about it nearly as much as you'd think. Brutal, but true. Evolution only cares intensely about things that stop you from reproducing. So what was the real threat? The answer is a molecule you've probably never thought about in your life, and it might be the single most important character in this entire story: folate. Folate, also known as vitamin B9, is essential for making DNA and for cell division, and it is absolutely critical during pregnancy, especially in the earliest weeks, for the healthy development of a baby's brain and spine. Not enough folate, and you get devastating birth defects. Here's the problem: intense ultraviolet radiation, the invisible part of sunlight, destroys folate in your body. It breaks it down right in your bloodstream, near the surface of your skin. So picture the situation. You are a newly hairless human, standing under the equatorial sun, and that sun is quietly demolishing the exact molecule your unborn children need to develop properly. Suddenly, this is a life or death problem, not for you, necessarily, for your babies. And now evolution is very, very interested. And so came the solution: melanin. Melanin is a pigment your body produces, and it is a genuinely spectacular piece of biological engineering. It sits in your skin cells, and it acts as a natural built-in sunscreen, absorbing ultraviolet radiation before it can penetrate deeper and wreck your folate. The more melanin you have, the darker your skin, and the more protection you get. Over hundreds of thousands of years, as our ancestors lost their fur under that punishing sun, natural selection cranked the melanin dial way, way up. The individuals with darker skin protected their folate. Their babies were more likely to develop properly and survive. The individuals with paler skin had more failed pregnancies and more damaged children. Repeat that over thousands of generations and the result is inevitable. Dark skin. So here's the first big reveal. Dark skin is not the default state of humanity in some passive sense. Dark skin is an active, sophisticated, hard-won adaptation. It is a piece of technology your body builds, evolved specifically to solve a deadly problem. Every human being on Earth, without exception, is descended from dark-skinned ancestors. That's not opinion. That's the plain reading of the evidence. For the vast majority of our existence as a species, all humans were dark-skinned. So then the obvious question is, what on earth happened? Around 60 to 70,000 years ago, groups of humans began walking out of Africa. They spread into the Middle East, into Asia, and eventually up into Europe. And as they moved north, they walked into a completely different world. Not just colder, dimmer. At high latitudes, the sun sits lower in the sky, the days shrink in winter, and the ultraviolet radiation that reaches the ground plummets. In Northern Europe, for months at a time, the UV is so weak that it's effectively useless for a human body. And now, all of a sudden, that magnificent dark skin, the perfect solution to the African sun, becomes a liability. Why? Because of another vitamin. And this one you have definitely heard of. Vitamin D. Vitamin D is not really a vitamin at all, in the strictest sense. It's a hormone your body manufactures, and the factory is your skin. When ultraviolet light hits your skin, it kicks off a chemical reaction that produces vitamin D. And vitamin D is essential. It's what lets your body absorb calcium and build strong bones. Without it, children develop rickets, where the bones literally soften and bend under the body's own weight, deforming the legs, the spine, and critically, the pelvis. And here is the brutal part that ties everything together. A woman with a deformed pelvis, warped by childhood rickets, can face catastrophic difficulty giving birth. In a world with no surgery, that was frequently a death sentence for both mother and child. Vitamin D also plays a role in the immune system, and low levels leave you more vulnerable to infection. So put it together. You are a dark-skinned human living in Northern Europe. Your beautiful melanin sunscreen, evolved for the equator, is now blocking the tiny, precious trickle of UV you desperately need to make vitamin D. You are, in effect, wearing sunscreen in a place with almost no sun, and so the dial ran in reverse. In these low UV regions, individuals who happened to carry mutations for lighter skin absorbed more of that weak sunlight, made more vitamin D, built stronger bones, and had healthier children who survived. Over generations, the melanin dial cranked back down, not because light skin is better, because in that specific place, with that specific sunlight, it worked. This is the central insight of the whole story, and almost everyone misses it. Human skin color is not a ladder, it's a dial, and it's tuned by exactly one thing: the amount of ultraviolet light hitting the ground where your ancestors lived. It's a trade-off, a compromise. Dark skin protects your folate but starves you of vitamin D. Light skin lets in vitamin D but leaves your folate exposed. Every population on Earth sits somewhere on that dial, and the setting is a direct reflection of the sky above their ancestors' heads. Map human skin tone across the globe before modern travel, and it lines up with UV intensity so precisely it's almost eerie. It is one of the cleanest examples of natural selection we have. And here's a detail that proves the dial is real, because you have one and you use it every summer. Tanning. When you sit in the sun, your skin gets darker. That is not damage in the way people assume. That is your body detecting incoming ultraviolet radiation and frantically cranking out extra melanin to shield you. It is the exact same ancient system, still installed, still running, still responding in real time. You are literally watching a million-year-old survival mechanism operate on your own arm. And notice how the dial has limits. Someone with very pale skin can barely tan at all, because the machinery to produce that much melanin has been genetically dialed down. Someone with darker skin tans easily and deeply, because the machinery is fully intact. Your tan is not a lifestyle choice. It is your body's emergency response to a threat your ancestors solved a million years ago. Now here's where the story goes from interesting to genuinely shocking, because you'd assume that this change happened slowly, over the 60,000 years since humans left Africa. Right? Wrong. And this is the part that stuns people. Thanks to ancient DNA, we can now look directly at the genes of people who lived thousands of years ago. And what they found rewrote the textbook. There is a gene called SLC24A5. It's one of the biggest single contributors to light skin in Europeans. And a specific variant of it swept through the European population like wildfire. But the timing is the incredible part. That variant appears to have become common only around 8,000 years ago. 8,000. Let that sink in. Humans had already invented agriculture. There were villages, there were monuments, people were farming, herding, making pottery. Civilization was already warming up, and pale skin in Europe was still, in evolutionary terms, brand new. And it gets better. Scientists sequenced the DNA of a man who lived in Britain around 10,000 years ago, known as Cheddar Man, one of the oldest complete British skeletons ever found. And when they reconstructed his appearance from his genes, the result was so surprising, it made headlines around the world. The best interpretation of his DNA suggested he had dark skin and blue eyes. A dark-skinned, blue-eyed Briton, 10,000 years ago. Now, we should be careful here. Predicting skin color from ancient DNA is genuinely difficult, and researchers have debated how confident we can be about exactly how dark he was. But the broad picture holds up across many ancient genomes. The early hunter-gatherers of Europe were substantially darker than modern Europeans, and pale skin arrived remarkably late. The people who painted the great cave art of Europe were not pale. The first Europeans were dark-skinned. Pale skin is the newcomer. And while we're here, those blue eyes deserve a moment of their own, because they might be the single strangest fact in this whole story. Every blue-eyed person on Earth may be descended from one individual. Somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years ago, in one human being, a mutation appeared near a gene that controls pigment in the iris. It didn't create blue pigment, because there is no blue pigment in a human eye. What it did was switch down the brown pigment, and the eye then scatters light and looks blue, for the same reason the sky does. That single mutation spread, and that means every blue-eyed person alive today, hundreds of millions of people, is carrying a copy of the same tiny accident that happened once, in one person, relatively recently. If you have blue eyes, you and every other blue-eyed human on the planet are, in that specific sense, related. One ancestor, one mutation, one quirk of light. So why so late? Why did it take tens of thousands of years in Europe for skin to lighten? And here's where one of the most delicious twists in this whole story comes in. It might be the fault of bread. Think about what those early hunter-gatherers were eating. Fish, reindeer, liver, fatty meat. And here's the thing. Some of those foods, particularly oily fish and organ meats, are loaded with vitamin D.
If you're eating a diet rich in vitamin D, you don't need your skin to manufacture much of it. The dietary supply covers you, so the pressure to lighten your skin is weak. You can stay dark and be perfectly healthy. But then agriculture arrived, and people started eating a lot of grain, wheat, barley, porridge, bread, and grain, whatever else it does for you, contains almost no vitamin D. So suddenly, the dietary supply dried up.
Now your skin had to do all the work of making vitamin D in a place with barely any sunlight, while you were still wearing your ancestral melanin sunscreen. And that, many researchers believe, is when the pressure to lighten really slammed down. Pale skin in Europe may be, in large part, a side effect of the invention of farming. Read that again. One of the most obsessed over physical traits in human history might essentially be a consequence of switching from fish to bread. History is absurd sometimes, and if you want proof that this is really about sunlight and diet rather than anything deeper, nature ran the perfect experiment for us. The Inuit. The Inuit live in the Arctic, at some of the highest latitudes any humans have ever occupied, in places with brutally low UV. By the logic of the dial, they should be extremely pale. They are not. They have retained noticeably darker skin than you'd predict from their latitude. Why? Because of what they eat. The traditional Inuit diet is built on fish and marine mammals, foods absolutely loaded with vitamin D. They get it from their food, so their skin never needed to lighten to manufacture it. The rule held perfectly. The exception proves it. Skin color tracks vitamin D availability. from sun and from diet, and nothing else. And here's the final piece that dismantles the whole naive picture. Light skin did not evolve once. It evolved multiple times, separately, in different parts of the world, using different genes. The mutations that lighten skin in Europeans are largely not the same mutations that lighten skin in East Asians. Two populations, facing the same low UV problem in different places, stumbled onto different genetic solutions and arrived at a similar outcome by completely separate paths. That's called convergent evolution, and it's the same reason bats and birds both have wings without being closely related. So there is no single event where humans went from dark to light. There were several, independently, in different populations, at different times, through different genes. The story isn't a line. It's a bush, branching in a dozen directions, every branch just trying to solve the local sunlight problem. And that ancient system is still quietly running your life today, in ways you probably never connected. Vitamin D deficiency is remarkably common in the modern world, and the reason is almost funny. We spend our lives indoors, behind glass, under artificial light, wrapped in clothes, coated in sunscreen. We built a world that blocks the exact signal our skin evolved to catch. A body tuned over 1 million years to read the sun now barely sees it, and the effect isn't evenly spread. People with darker skin living at high latitudes, in cloudy northern cities, are working against a double disadvantage their ancestors never faced: weak sunlight and strong melanin, a combination that simply did not exist for most of human history until people started moving across the planet faster than evolution could follow. Ancient wiring, modern world. It's the same story every single time. So let's step all the way back, because when you see the whole picture, something profound falls out of it. Human skin color is extremely recent, in some cases only thousands of years old, extremely superficial, a matter of pigment in the outermost layer of your body, extremely local, tuned to the specific angle of sunlight where your ancestors happened to stand. And it evolved back and forth multiple times, in multiple directions, purely as a response to the sky. It is, quite literally, the thinnest possible layer of you. And here's the thing that follows from that. And it's not a political statement, it's just what the biology says. If you take two people from opposite ends of the skin color spectrum, that difference is one of the most trivial, most recent, most surface-level things about them. Underneath, at the level of the genome, humans are astonishingly, boringly similar to each other. We are one of the least genetically diverse large species on the planet because we all squeezed through a narrow population bottleneck relatively recently. There is often more genetic variation within a single population than between populations on different continents. The trait that humans have historically built entire hierarchies, empires, and atrocities around turns out to be a sunscreen setting, a dial adjusted by ultraviolet light in the outermost millimeter of skin. That's it. That's the whole thing. Whole civilizations have been organized around a difference in melanin production driven by how high the sun sits in your ancestors' sky. When you actually understand the science, the entire concept collapses into something almost absurdly small. So, why did ancient humans change color? Because we lost our fur to run in the sun and needed melanin to protect our unborn children. Because we then walked north into a dim world where that same melanin was starving us of vitamin D. Because we swapped fish for bread and cut off our last supply. And because, over and over, in different places, at different times, our bodies quietly turned the dial to match the sky above us. Every human alive is running the same ancient code, with the same ancient machinery, just set to a slightly different value based on where their ancestors happen to stand under the sun. So the next time you look at your own skin, in whatever shade it happens to be, remember what you're actually looking at. Not an identity, not a category. You're looking at a record, a living readout of the exact angle of the sunlight that fell on your ancestors, thousands of years ago, in a place you have probably never been. You're wearing the sky they lived under, and underneath it all, in the fur and the sweat and the bone, we are still that same pale, hairy ape, walking out onto the savannah, squinting up at a sun that was about to change everything.